My wife cheated on me during a cruise, and I caught her minutes before the ship docked, standing barefoot on the observation deck with her lover's hands sliding up her thighs while the sunrise burned behind them like a warning flare. I didn't shout. I didn't swing. I didn't even breathe. I watched. I memorized every inch of the scene. And I realized, in a flash of icy clarity, that I'd spent the last 7 days sleeping beside a stranger. But it hadn't started there. It started with a laugh. A stupid, careless laugh. 2 nights before, we were sitting by the ship's pool bar, a long row of twinkling lights overhead, the hum of steel drums rolling across the decks. I was nursing it dark and stormy. She was sipping some neon cocktail, smiling a little too widely at something some sunburnt stranger said 2 chairs down. I didn't hear the joke, but I heard her laugh. Not her usual laugh. Not the sweet, tired giggle I knew. This one was lighter, sharper, like a knife being drawn. I turned my head and caught her looking at him, at a man I barely noticed before, a broad-shouldered guy in his early 40s, shirt open a little too far, a necklace winking against his tanned skin. His gaze caught hers, and for a second, the world spun just a little too fast. She looked away quickly, but the seed was planted. The next morning, she said she wanted to explore the ship alone. I blinked at her over my coffee. My wife hated being alone. That was one of the first things I loved about her. She always wanted me nearby. She said it so casually I almost missed it. I asked if she was feeling all right. She smiled brightly and said she just needed some me time. Me time? On a ship with 4,000 strangers. I shrugged it off. Maybe she did need some space. We'd both been working too hard, grinding ourselves to dust for years, and this trip was supposed to be the reward. Maybe the ocean was making her restless. At lunch, I waited for her. Watched the endless tide of passengers surging past the buffet line. Plates clattering, forks scraping, couples laughing too loud. No sign of her. I texted her. No reply. I told myself the ship's Wi-Fi was spotty. I ordered a beer and sat alone, staring out at the featureless blue where the sky and the sea kissed. She reappeared 2 hours later. No apology. No rush. She was glowing, cheeks flushed, eyes glassy from too much sun, or maybe something else. She slid into the seat across from me and ordered 2 cocktails at once, claiming she was just getting the party started. That night, things got worse. The ship hosted a dance party on the top deck. Flashing lights, a live band, hundreds of drunk strangers writhing and sweating under the stars. She dragged me onto the dance floor. For a little while, it felt almost normal, her hand in mine, her body pressed against me, until she spun away from me in a fit of giggles, and didn't come back. I lost her in the crowd. I searched for her, pushed through sweaty bodies, called her name once or twice. Finally, I spotted her near the railing, laughing, leaning in close to someone. It was him, the same man from the bar. I watched her touch his arm, lightly, playfully, the way she used to touch me when we first started dating, a tiny, innocent-seeming touch loaded with 1,000 electric promises. He whispered something into her ear. She threw her head back and laughed. Her hand brushed his chest. I stood frozen in place. I didn't storm over. I didn't make a scene. I just watched as she tilted her drink to him in a mock salute, then sauntered away back into the crowd. When she found me a few minutes later, she kissed my cheek like nothing had happened. I could still smell the alcohol on her breath. And something else. Something sour and foreign. The next day, she was extra sweet. She booked us a couple's massage. She planned a fancy dinner. She wore the little blue sundress I always loved, the one she said was too young for her now. She clung to my arm and laughed at my jokes and called me babe in that soft way she used to. But every now and then, I'd catch her staring off across the ship, looking for someone, waiting. That night at dinner, I saw it again. The hunger, the pulse in her throat. He was at the next table over. Coincidence, she claimed later. Small ship, she said with a shrug, when I asked her about it. I knew better. I knew ships this size were cities. You didn't just bump into someone over and over. The next afternoon, she disappeared again. Said she was going to the spa. Left her phone behind charging, she said. No way to call her. No way to check. 3 hours passed. Then 4. I sat on the edge of the bed in our cabin, flipping through the ship's schedule, pretending to read, feeling the unease crawling up my spine like ants under my skin. I told myself I was paranoid. I told myself I was tired. I told myself it was vacation. I told myself a lot of things. Around sunset, she waltzed back into the cabin, glowing, radiant, wearing a different dress than the one she left in. No explanation. No apology. Just a kiss on the forehead and a promise to make it up to me. I didn't ask. I didn't trust my voice. I just nodded and smiled, and later, when she curled into my side in bed, I stared at the ceiling and counted the seconds between each of her shallow breaths. The next day broke gray and sour, a sky heavy with clouds that mirrored the pit inside my stomach. Our cabin smelled faintly of salt and stale champagne, a sickly sweet reminder of how easily lies could ferment in paradise. She was already gone when I woke up. Her side of the bed was cold. The curtains were open, letting the weak light creep across the rumpled sheets. Her sandals were gone. So was her purse. I sat up too fast and the room spun. For a second, I told myself she had just gone for coffee. Maybe browsing the duty-free shops. Maybe looking for a breakfast buffet. I told myself a lot of things. An hour passed. Then another. When she finally drifted back in, she was carrying a plastic bag with a few souvenir t-shirts and a tiny bottle of rum. Her hair was like she'd been swimming. There was a thin red mark on her shoulder, half hidden under the strap of her sundress, the unmistakable burn of hands too rough, too greedy. I pretended not to notice. Because once you notice, you can't go back. Hey, babe, she chirped, tossing the bag onto the bed like a teenager coming back from the mall. You sleep okay? I nodded, forcing a smile. She wriggled out of her sandals and stretched, the movement pulling her dress tight across her body. I knew every inch of her skin. I had kissed every freckle, memorized every curve. Now it felt like studying a crime scene. That afternoon we wandered the promenade deck together, hand in hand, pretending. Or maybe only I was pretending. She seemed light, giddy almost, like a teenager on the first day of summer break. We stopped at a cocktail stand. She ordered something sugary and pink. I stuck to beer. As we sipped, I caught her eyes darting around, scanning faces. Searching. For him. Always for him. When she didn't find what she was looking for, she turned back to me with a bright, brittle smile that cracked at the edges. I was thinking, she said, swirling her straw. Maybe after dinner we hit the piano bar? Dance a little. I agreed immediately. Anything to keep her close. Anything to chain her to me, if only for a few hours. The dinner was a slow-motion car crash. We sat at a small table near the windows. Outside, the sea churned gray and restless. She picked at her food, barely eating, glancing at her watch every few minutes. I tried to talk about home, about the kids, about the plans we had made for the summer, but every conversation withered on the vine. Finally, I asked, "You okay?" She blinked at me, startled, like she'd forgotten I was there. Of course, she said quickly. Too quickly. Just tired. Tired. Always tired. When dessert came, she pushed it away untouched. She said she had a headache. She said maybe she would skip the piano bar after all. I tried not to show the anger that boiled up inside me. Instead, I offered to walk her back to the cabin. She hesitated. Just for a second. Just long enough. No, you go have fun, she said, squeezing my hand with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'll be fine. Just need some sleep. I should have insisted. I should have demanded. But I didn't. I let her go. I wandered the ship alone, aimless, like a ghost haunting a life that was already gone. The music from the piano bar drifted out across the decks, old standards, love songs, songs that once meant something. I leaned against the railing, staring out into the black water, feeling smaller and more useless than I ever had in my life. I thought about walking back to the cabin. I thought about bursting in, finding her asleep, peaceful, innocent, proving myself wrong. Instead, I stayed out there until the music died and the deck emptied and the ocean swallowed the last of the ship's lights. When I finally stumbled back to the cabin, the door was locked from the inside. I knocked softly. It took a long time for her to answer. She opened the door just a crack, her face half hidden in shadow. Her hair was messy. Her eyes were glassy. She wore a different nightgown than the one she packed, one I had never seen before, a silky, revealing thing that clung to her in ways that made my chest tighten. Hey, she whispered. Sorry, I must have fallen asleep. I stepped inside, and the room smelled faintly, wrong. Not perfume, not alcohol, something rawer, sharper. I told myself it was my imagination. I told myself a lot of things. I slid into bed beside her, feeling the distance between our bodies like a canyon. She turned away from me without a word. I laid there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between her shallow, restless breaths. The next day, things frayed even more. We had signed up for a snorkeling excursion at a private island, something we'd booked months ago, back when we still believed in fairy tales. She bailed last minute. My stomach feels off, she said, waving me off with a fake smile. You go, have fun. I stood there, holding 2 sets of snorkeling gear like a fool, watching her retreat back into the ship's belly. I should have gone after her. I should have demanded answers. Instead, I went on the excursion alone, swimming in cold water, surrounded by strangers, feeling like a man whose house had burned down while he was out mowing the lawn. When I returned hours later, sunburned and exhausted, she was sitting on the balcony of our cabin, wearing sunglasses and sipping a mojito. She looked relaxed. Content. Too content. How was it? She asked, tossing a smile over her shoulder. Fine, I said, my voice dry. We barely spoke the rest of the day. Dinner was a tense, silent affair. We ate quickly, mechanically, barely looking at each other. I tried to tell myself this was normal, that couples fought, drifted, lost each other for a little while. But in my gut, I knew better. That night, lying awake in the dark, I let myself think the thought I'd been running from. She's cheating on me. The words settled in my chest like stones. But almost immediately, I recoiled from it. No, not her. Not us. We were strong. We were solid. We had built a life together. We had weathered storms before. She loved me, didn't she? I stared at the ceiling until dawn, trying to remember the last time she had touched me without flinching. Trying to remember the last time she had looked at me the way she used to. All I could remember was the way she laughed at him. All I could hear was the hollow echo of that laughter, bouncing around in the empty chambers of my heart. The next morning, she was already dressed when I woke up. She stood by the small mirror, dabbing something under her eyes, the quick, practiced movements of someone trying to erase the evidence of a bad night's sleep. I watched her in silence, pretending to still be asleep, studying every twitch of her fingers. Her phone buzzed on the table. She snatched it up like it was a live grenade. Just a reflex, I told myself. Just nerves. We were both on edge. It didn't have to mean anything. She turned toward me, forcing a bright smile. Morning, sleepyhead, she chirped, her voice just a little too high, a little too brittle. I grunted something in return and pushed myself upright, every joint aching. I felt like I'd been hollowed out and stitched together wrong. Big day today, she said, pulling on her sandals. The island stop. You excited? I nodded, forcing a smile that tasted like blood. She breezed out the door before I could answer properly. We docked mid-morning at one of those private tourist islands, a pre-packaged slice of paradise with thatched roof bars and carefully manicured beaches. Everyone swarmed off the ship like ants fleeing a kicked nest. She clung to my arm for the first hour, chattering about snorkeling, sunbathing, shopping. Her laughter was a little too loud, her touches a little too forced. I almost let myself believe her. Almost. Then I saw him, standing at the far end of the beach, near the volleyball courts, tossing a ball lazily from hand to hand. Watching her. No, not watching her. Waiting for her. She saw him too. I felt the tension in her fingers, the brief hesitation before she squeezed my arm tighter and dragged me toward the rental cabanas. We spent the next hour sunbathing in a hollow parody of normalcy. She wore a tiny bikini I'd never seen before. I tried to joke about it, tried to compliment her, but the words felt foreign in my mouth. She smiled, said thanks, and then promptly buried her nose in a book she clearly wasn't reading. Every few minutes, her eyes would flick toward the volleyball courts. He was still there, still waiting. The storm hit without warning. One minute the sky was blinding blue, the next it was a churning mass of black clouds and razor-sharp rain. People screamed and scattered like roaches. Vendors slammed down the shutters of their stands. Loudspeakers crackled to life, urging everyone back to the ship. We grabbed our towels and ran, laughing breathlessly, soaked through in seconds. As we pounded up the gangway, she stumbled, and instinctively I caught her arm. She jerked away from me like my touch burned her. It was a small thing, a blink-and-you-miss-it moment, but it hit me harder than any slap. Back in our cabin, we stripped off our wet clothes and toweled off in awkward silence. I offered to order room service, to warm us up, to make things normal again. She shook her head, pulling on a loose sweater and leggings. I'm tired, she said. I think I'm just going to nap. Nap. Again. It felt like every excuse she made lately was about being tired, sick, needing space. Sure, I said, trying to keep my voice light. She climbed into bed and pulled the covers up to her chin. I sat at the small desk, pretending to scroll through excursion options on my phone, feeling the weight of her silence fill the room like smoke. An hour later, I heard the soft buzz of her phone under the pillow. She didn't stir. I glanced over, heart hammering. Another buzz. Another. I couldn't help it. I reached out, hand shaking, and pulled the phone free. A notification flashed across the locked screen. Can't wait to see you tonight. No name. Just a number. Just those words. My vision blurred. My fingers itched to unlock it, to tear the truth out of it. But we didn't have passwords between us. There was no reason to. Until now. I put the phone back and stood up, pacing the tiny cabin like a caged animal. Dinner that night was an ugly, festering thing. She dressed carefully, too carefully, dark lipstick, high heels, a little black dress that clung to her in ways I hadn't seen in years. She didn't ask my opinion. She didn't seem to care what I thought at all. We sat at a small table by the window again. I could barely taste my food. My hand shook as I lifted my fork. She was radiant. She was laughing. She was somewhere else. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. You look nice, I said, my voice low, tight. She blinked at me, surprised, as if she'd forgotten I was there. Thanks, she said after a moment, flashing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Big plans tonight? I asked casually. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Just hanging out, she said quickly. Maybe catch the late show. Without me. She hesitated again. It was quick, but it was there. You seem tired, she said, reaching for her wine glass. I stared at her, feeling something inside me twist and snap. I thought this trip was about us, I said. My voice was still low, still steady, but there was an edge to it now. Razor sharp. She bristled immediately. It is about us, she said sharply. Why are you being like this? Like what? I said, leaning in. Like a husband who notices when his wife disappears for hours without explanation? Who notices when she's getting secret messages? When she pulls away every time he touches her? Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. You're being paranoid, she hissed. Am I? I said, smiling tightly. Maybe you can explain the messages you've been getting. The sudden need for space. The way you light up every time you see it. I cut myself off. Her face was pale. Her eyes were wild. I'm not doing this, she snapped, pushing back her chair so hard it nearly toppled. Not here. Not now. She stormed out of the dining room, heels clicking like gunshots on the polished floor. I sat there, alone, staring after her. Everyone else went on eating, laughing, drinking. Like nothing had just shattered in front of them. I found her hours later, sitting on one of the empty decks, staring out at the black water. She didn't look up when I sat beside her. We didn't speak. The wind tore at her hair. She didn't smooth it down. After a long time, she whispered, I just needed a break. A break from me? I asked, my voice raw. She didn't answer. And that silence, that heavy, damning silence, told me more than any confession ever could. The next morning, I barely recognized the woman standing in our cabin. She hummed while brushing her hair, her back to me, hips swaying in a little rhythm. It wasn't a song I knew. It wasn't a hum meant for me. She was dressed in a short floral sundress, her skin still kissed with the golden touch of yesterday's sun. She dabbed on perfume, a new bottle, the scent rising sweet and sharp into the air. She'd never worn it before. I said nothing. I did nothing. I just watched. The man I was before this trip, the man who trusted blindly, he was already gone. In his place stood something colder, hungrier. She insisted we spend the morning apart again. She mumbled something about a spa appointment she couldn't cancel, smoothing the lie out with an effortless grace that chilled me to the core. I nodded, smiled even. Inside, my guts twisted into something feral. She left the room with a careless kiss on my cheek. I waited exactly 10 minutes before following. I didn't run. I didn't sneak. I simply moved through the ship like a shadow, eyes wide open for the first time in days. The halls were crowded with hungover passengers and families corralling sunburned children. I moved past them all, scanning, searching, feeling the pounding pulse of inevitability drum behind my ribs. There, near the elevators. She wasn't alone. He was with her. They didn't touch, not here, not yet. But they stood too close, their heads bowed together, laughing low and conspiratorial. I ducked behind a decorative plant, heart jackhammering so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. I pulled out my phone, hands shaking, snapped a picture. Blurry. Useless. They moved toward the spa deck, walking fast, weaving through the crowd like professionals. I followed at a distance, feeling ridiculous, like a teenager stalking his crush. They vanished behind the frosted glass doors of the spa. I stared at the closed door for a long time. What was I going to do? Burst in? Confront them? Scream in rage and make a scene? No, not yet. If I was going to burn this down, I was going to do it right. I waited in the cafe across from the spa, nursing a bitter coffee that tasted like ashes. Minutes dragged into an hour. 2. Every so often, I'd glance up at the spa doors. Nothing. No sign of her. No sign of him. My mind tortured me with images I couldn't stop, her lying back on a massage table, him leaning over her, whispering in her ear, their hands tangling under thin towels. I nearly broke the cup in my hand. Finally, the spa doors opened. She stepped out alone, sunglasses perched on her head, lips curved into a dreamy, absent smile. I slid down in my chair, heart in my throat. She didn't see me. She didn't even look around. She just drifted down the corridor, loose-limbed, glowing. I followed her back to our cabin at a distance, every footstep hammering nails into the coffin of our marriage. The rest of the afternoon passed in a fog. She was sweet again, overly sweet, chattering about booking another excursion, about how much she loved the shows on board, about the jewelry sale in the ship's boutique. I answered in monosyllables, my mind elsewhere. At dinner, she wore a new necklace, a delicate silver chain with a tiny sapphire pendant. I got it at the sale, she said, tracing it with her fingers. Pretty, huh? I nodded numbly. The pendant caught the light and winked at me like a private joke. I wondered if he had paid for it, or if he had picked it out, his hands brushing hers over the velvet display case. That night, she claimed she was too tired for the evening show. Again, she urged me to go without her, to have some fun. I didn't argue. I walked the corridors alone, circling the ship like a shark scenting blood, my mind whirling with paranoia. She wasn't in our room. I knew it before I even turned the handle. The room was dark, empty. Her sandals were gone. I stood there for a long time, breathing the hollow air. Then I turned and went hunting. The ship was a maze at night, darkened halls, empty lounges, scattered clusters of late-night drinkers laughing too loud. I checked the piano bar first. Empty. The casino. Nothing. The pool decks. No sign. Panic crawled up my spine. Where was she? I almost gave up. Almost turned back. Then I caught a glimpse, just a flash, of her sundress disappearing around the corner of the observation deck. I followed, my feet moving before my mind could catch up. The deck was nearly deserted, just a few stragglers clustered near the railings. And there she was, standing near the railing, leaning out over the sea, alone. I froze in the shadows, every nerve ending crackling. She wasn't meeting him. Not this time. Just standing there, hugging herself against the wind. I watched her for a long time. And for the first time, I wondered, was she regretting it? Was there a tiny sliver of guilt worming its way into that pretty, painted smile? Or was she simply planning her next move, her next lie? I didn't know anymore. I didn't know her anymore. I slipped back to our cabin before she could see me. When she returned half an hour later, she kissed me lightly on the forehead, whispered something about needing sleep, and curled into her side of the bed, back to me, body stiff. I stared at the ceiling all night. The next day was worse. She was jittery, skittish, jumping when her phone buzzed, checking over her shoulder when we walked the crowded decks. She tried to hide it with chatter and jokes, but it was a mask stretched too thin. At lunch, she excused herself halfway through the meal, claiming a headache. I watched her walk away, watched her shoulders tighten when she thought I wasn't looking. I didn't follow her this time. I didn't need to. I knew where she was going. I knew who she was going to. That afternoon, the ship hosted a dance party on the Lido deck. She begged off, said she needed rest. I went alone. I needed the noise, the chaos, something to drown out the screaming in my head. The music was loud, thudding, relentless. People laughed, danced, drank. I stood at the railing, drink untouched, staring out at the endless expanse of blue. Somewhere behind me, life went on. Somewhere behind me, strangers fell in love, friends made memories, old couples renewed their vows. And me? I stood there, bleeding out silently under the bright, merciless sun. Later that night, as we dressed for the captain's gala, the formal farewell party, I watched her carefully. She shimmered in a midnight blue dress, hair swept up, makeup flawless. She was beautiful. She was poison. I straightened my tie in the mirror and caught her reflection staring at me. For a moment, just a heartbeat, something flickered in her eyes. Regret? Fear? Pity? I didn't know. And it didn't matter. Because tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, the mask would shatter. Tomorrow, the truth would burn through this ship like a fire. But tonight? Tonight I would wait. And watch. And bleed. In silence. The last night of the cruise was a glittering, desperate thing. Everyone crammed into the ship's grand ballroom, dressed to the nines, grinning like they could hold back the inevitable end of vacation with champagne and false laughter. I wore my best suit. She wore a dress the color of blood. Perfect. She clung to my arm all evening, smiling too brightly, laughing too hard, posing for pictures with strangers like the perfect wife. But her eyes kept flicking over my shoulder. Searching. Waiting. I smiled too. Because tonight, I wasn't hunting anymore. Tonight, I was ready to kill, not with fists, not with shouting, but with something sharper. The truth. The ballroom lights dimmed. The captain gave his farewell speech. People clapped, some cried. And my wife? She drifted away from me the second the applause started. I'm going to the ladies' room, she whispered, squeezing my hand. I let her go. Watched her weave through the crowd, head bent low, clutching her tiny glittering purse like it was a secret. I counted to 30 in my head. Then I moved. I followed her down the velvet-carpeted hallways, past the gift shops and lounges, past laughing drunk couples stumbling toward their last night's fling. She wasn't heading toward the bathrooms. She was slipping through a side door, out onto a darkened observation deck. My heart hammered once, then went dead calm. I pulled out my phone. Already recording. I stepped onto the deck just in time to see them meet, the man she had betrayed me with, standing there, arms open, pulling her in like she was already his. She melted into him. Their lips crashed together. I filmed it all. Close. Clear. Undeniable. My stomach twisted, not with jealousy, not with heartbreak, but with a cold, vicious satisfaction. I waited until they broke apart, giggling, whispering. Then I stepped into the light. Her laughter died in her throat. She froze. Her lover froze. I smiled. A cold, dead thing. Don't stop on my account, I said, voice like broken glass. You're putting on quite the show. Her mouth opened and closed. No words came out. The man, him, had the audacity to step forward. Look, man, he started, hands up like he was talking down a wild animal. It's not what it looks like. I laughed. A short, sharp bark. Save it, I said, waving my phone. I've got everything I need. I turned my gaze back to her, my wife, my stranger. She was pale, shaking, tears already welling. Pathetic. How long? I asked, voice low. She swallowed hard. Please. How long? She crumbled. Since the second night, she whispered. I nodded. The second night. While I was buying her drinks. While I was planning a surprise massage for us. While I was still stupid enough to believe we were happy. Perfect. I turned the camera on myself now, recording. To my family, I said into the lens, this is what she's been doing while you thought we were on a second honeymoon. To my friends, thanks for the advice to take her away to fix things. Turns out she just needed new scenery to screw someone else. I panned the camera back to her tear-streaked, mascara running, trembling. And to you, I said, voice flat. This is your legacy. I sent the video to our family group chat with a few taps. No warning. No editing. Raw betrayal. Immediate. She lunged toward me. Please, please don't. I stepped back. Save it, I said coldly. You made your choice. The other man tried to speak again. I ignored him. He was irrelevant now. A footnote. I turned on my heel and walked away. Left her standing there in the dark, sobbing into her hands, clutching at a man who wasn't brave enough to even touch her anymore. By the time I reached the cabin, my phone was exploding. Dozens of missed calls, voicemails, text after text. Family. Friends. Our daughters. Her sister. Her parents. I didn't answer any of them. I packed my bag in silence. Every shirt, every pair of shoes folded with surgical precision. She burst into the room 20 minutes later, red-faced, trembling. Please, she gasped. Let's talk. Just talk. Please, it was a mistake. I zipped up my suitcase and stood there, staring at her like she was an interesting insect under glass. You didn't make a mistake, I said. You made a choice. She dropped to her knees. I didn't flinch. You threw away a marriage, I continued, voice steady. You threw away a life. For what? A cruise ship fling. Her hands clawed at my pant leg. I stepped back like she was diseased. I will make you regret this, I said calmly. Not with screaming. Not with threats. With silence. And I did. When we docked, I left her. I filed for divorce the next day, citing adultery with evidence. I changed the locks. Cut off her cards. Seized the accounts we once shared. Her family turned on her when the video spread like wildfire. Our daughters? They blocked her numbers. She tried to call, to email, to show up at my work crying. Security escorted her out each time. I never said a word. Not once. I just watched her world collapse from a safe, silent distance. She lost everything. Friends, family, reputation. And me? I walked away clean. No screaming matches. No begging. Just a man who knew his worth and knew exactly how to crush a traitor without lifting a finger. Subscribe to hear more stories.